The night was thick with an ominous silence as I cruised down the empty streets, the only company being the soft hum of my delivery van's engine. I was accustomed to the solitude of the graveyard shift, delivering packages to remote corners of the city when most people were tucked away in their beds, oblivious to the darkness outside. But tonight felt different, as if the shadows themselves were watching me with malevolent intent. I glanced nervously at the clock on the dashboard. It was nearing midnight, and I still had a few more deliveries to make before I could call it a night. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The next address on my list led me to an old, dilapidated building at the edge of town. The windows were boarded up, and weeds choked the cracked pavement leading to the front door. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to make the delivery or simply mark it as undeliverable and move on, but duty compelled me to press on, so I grabbed the package and stepped out into the chilly night air. As I approached the building, a sense of dread washed over me like a tidal wave. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee from whatever darkness lurked within those decaying walls. But I swallowed my fear and rapped sharply on the door, the sound echoing eerily in the silent night. For what felt like an eternity, there was no response. Then, just as I was about to give up and leave, the door creaked open with a groan of rusty hinges. I peered into the darkness beyond, but there was nothing to be seen, except the faint glow of a single light bulb flickering in the distance. With a trembling hand, I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a resounding thud. The air was thick with the musty scent of neglect, and the floorboards creaked ominously beneath my feet. I navigated the dimly lit hallway, the package held tightly to my chest like a shield against the encroaching darkness. I finally reached the room designated on the delivery slip and pushed open the door. What greeted me inside sent a shiver down my spine. The room was barren except for a single chair placed in the center, its wooden frame warped and twisted as if it had been subjected to unimaginable torment. And seated in that chair was a figure cloaked in shadow, their features obscured by the darkness. I cleared my throat nervously, trying to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. "I have a delivery for you," I managed to stammer out, holding the package out and offering. The figure said nothing, but a cold, rasping laugh filled the room, sending a chill down my spine. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, but before I could flee, the figure reached out a hand and beckoned me forward with a gnarled finger. With a sense of mounting dread, I approached, the package trembling in my grasp. The figure snatched it from my hands with a speed that belied their age, tearing it open with a fervor that sent shivers down my spine. And then, with a guttural growl, they withdrew a grotesque object from within the package, holding it aloft for me to see. It was a human skull, its empty eye socket staring back at me with a haunting emptiness. I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward and tripping over my own feet. The figure advanced on me with an unnatural grace, their form twisting and contorting in the flickering light. I scrambled to my feet and dashed for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I reached for the handle, I found it had vanished, leaving nothing but a smooth expanse of wood in its place. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, screaming for help into the suffocating darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, leaving me alone in the empty room with nothing but the echoes of my own fear. I sank to the ground, trembling uncontrollably as I struggled to make sense of what had just occurred. Hours passed before I finally found the courage to leave that accursed place, my mind haunted by the memory of that twisted figure and the chilling laughter that still echoed in my ears. I stumbled back to my van, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. As I drove away from that forsaken building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent had been unleashed upon the world that night. And though I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind, a part of me knew that the darkness was real, and it hungered for more than just flesh and bone.
The headlights cut through the suffocating darkness, twin beams of light slicing through the void as I drove down a winding back road. My delivery van, white, plain, and forgettable, rattled slightly as it hit another pothole. The packages in the back shifted with the jolt, a muffled thump against the thin partition separating me from the cargo. The GPS screen on my dashboard glowed a pale blue, displaying the route to my next stop, an address I'd never been to before, deep in the woods. I cursed under my breath. I hated night deliveries. There was something unnatural about driving through remote places when the world was asleep. But a paycheck was a paycheck, and with rent due in 2 days, I couldn't afford to be picky. I glanced at the package sitting on the passenger seat, its brown cardboard scuffed and damp. The label was smudged, but I could still make out the address. 154 Black Hollow Road. The GPS said I was 10 minutes away. 10 minutes too long, if you ask me. As I drove deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in, their skeletal branches arching over the road like bony fingers. The air grew colder, and I noticed a creeping fog curling along the ground. I turned up the heat, but it didn't seem to make a difference. My fingers felt stiff on the steering wheel. The van's clock ticked to 11:47 p.m. when I saw the mailbox. It was old and rusted, leaning at an odd angle like it had been shoved into the ground as an afterthought. The numbers 154 were barely visible, scratched into the metal. I slowed the van and turned onto the narrow gravel driveway that disappeared into the woods. The tires crunched against the stones, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave that package on the mailbox and get the hell out of there. But the delivery instructions were clear. Hand deliver. No exceptions. The driveway stretched on longer than I expected, winding deeper into the forest. The trees pressed closer, their branches clawing at the van's windows. My headlights illuminated patches of fog and the occasional glint of dew on the leaves, but the house remained hidden. Just as I began to wonder if I'd taken a wrong turn, the driveway opened up into a clearing. The house stood there like a sentinel. 2 stories, Victorian style, but its grandeur had long faded. The paint was peeling, and several windows were boarded up. A single light burned on the porch, casting long shadows across the rotting wood steps. I parked the van and killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening. "Just drop it off and go," I muttered to myself. My voice sounded too loud, too alone. I grabbed the package, its weight heavier than I expected, and stepped out of the van. The air outside was icy, biting through my jacket. My breath puffed out in white clouds as I approached the house. The porch creaked under my boots, each step like a gunshot in the stillness. I reached the door and hesitated. There was no doorbell, only a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a raven. Its eyes seemed to glint in the dim light. I lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed, deep and hollow. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. "Great," I muttered. I set the package down on the porch, intending to snap a photo for proof of delivery. But the second I straightened up, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, pale and thin, her dark hair hanging in limp strands around her face. She wore a faded grey dress that looked like it belonged in another century. Her eyes, too large for her gaunt face, locked onto mine, unblinking. "Delivery for you," I said, my voice shaky. I held up the package like a peace offering. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me. I shifted uncomfortably, You need to sign for it." Slowly, she reached out a hand, her fingers thin and claw-like. She took the package without breaking eye contact. Her touch brushed against mine, and I recoiled. Her skin was ice. "Have a good night," I said, taking a step back. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and retreated into the house. The door closed with a soft click. I hurried back to the van, my heart hammering. As I slid into the driver's seat, I realized I hadn't gotten her signature. But there was no way I was going back. I'd explain it to my supervisor later. Right now, I just wanted to leave. The van's engine sputtered to life, and I turned the vehicle around, the gravel crunching under the tires. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I pulled away and froze. She was standing in the middle of the driveway, the package still in her hands, watching me. Her figure grew smaller as I sped up, but her silhouette remained in the mirror until I turned back onto the main road. I exhaled, gripping the wheel tightly. Just a creepy lady, I told myself. Nothing to freak out about. But as I drove, the fog thickened, swallowing the road. The GPS began to glitch, the screen flickering. The directions recalculated over and over, spinning me in circles. I slowed the van, trying to get my bearings, but the trees all looked the same, their twisted shapes looming out of the mist. The clock on the dashboard read 12:03 a.m. when I noticed the faint sound. At first, I thought it was static from the radio, but it grew louder, sharper, a whispering, no, a scratching, like nails on metal. I glanced in the rearview mirror again and nearly swerved off the road. The woman was sitting in the back of the van. Her gaunt face was illuminated by the dim interior light, her eyes fixed on me. The package was gone, her hands empty. She tilted her head, a slow, deliberate motion, and smiled. Her teeth were jagged, too sharp, and her smile stretched wider than it should have. I slammed on the brakes, the van skidding to a halt. I turned around, heart pounding, but the back of the van was empty. The packages were neatly stacked, untouched. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled to put the van in drive. The scratching sound returned, louder now, coming from the roof. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I just floored the gas pedal, the van lurching forward. The whispering started again, a chorus of voices I couldn't understand, surrounding me. The fog seemed to thicken, tendrils of it slipping through the vents and coiling around my arms. My vision blurred, the road disappearing beneath the swirling mist. And then the headlights illuminated something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was her. I swerved, the van careening off the road and into the trees. The impact jolted me forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me in silence except for the rapid thud of my heartbeat. I sat there, gripping the wheel, too afraid to move. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't dare reach for it. The windows were fogged, and the darkness outside felt alive, pressing in on all sides. A soft tap came at the driver's side window. I turned my head slowly. She was there, her face inches from the glass, her too wide smile glowing in the dark. Her hand pressed against the window, the nails clicking as she dragged them down, leaving long, jagged scratches. The door unlocked with a soft click, and then everything went black.